Born in 1831, Sitting Bull soon to become the chief of the great Lakota Indians, known for having a vision just weeks before the Battle of Little Bighorn with Lieutenant Colonel George Custer of 7th Cavalry, where he saw the fall and demise of the soldiers against the superior Indians. Having been exiled to Canada for 4 years, he came back to America in 1881. The aging chief spent most of the next 2 years as a prisoner before being assigned to Standing Rock Agency, and later he was killed over his supposed involvement in the ghost dance movement. This is Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet with Captain Ron, and today we have the great-grandson of Sitting Bull, Ernie Pointe, to tell us about who Sitting Bull really was, what really happened, and how history portrayed him completely wrong. Ernie is also, in his own right, a sun dancer and a Native American author. We want to welcome to Truth Be Told, Ernie Pointe. Ernie, thank you so much for being part of Truth Be Told. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Well, Ernie, I want to get right into it. Your grandfather, he made history, not only just being a chief, but he was also someone that made a difference in this, the history books, because of how they treated him and your family and Lakota, the nation itself. Can we go back and actually talk about your grandfather and what you knew? Because, I grew up with just last name of Sweet. I didn't really know of any famous, family members in my family. But when you come from this lineage, first of all, how did that make you feel? And then how did you really learn about your grandfather, and how did you become to appreciate him?
Well, I actually started out living on a reservation. I was born in a Pine Ridge Indian reservation. And growing up, I guess I can recall back to when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And my mother, we didn't have what the luxuries they have now. All we had was, we lived in a log house, and we had no electricity, no running water, no indoor plumbing, nothing. We had wood stoves and kerosene lamps. And the only entertainment we had was my mother. And my sister and I and my niece and nephew, we would be in front of her. She would light up the kerosene lamp at night, and she would tell us stories until you fell asleep about our culture and about our ancestors. And in the Lakota culture, when you're telling about your ancestors, or you're telling a story about your culture, you don't use the name. You always talk about like your uncle, your grandfather, your sister, your auntie. And then later on, they might reveal to you the name of who they were talking about. But basically, she was talking about her grandfather. And for a long time, I didn't know who this grandfather was until one day she told me his name was Tatanka Iotaki. In Lakota, that means a buffalo bull who sits down. And, again, like at the beginning, you said that when the Americans were putting this enrollment and all this kind of stuff into their written history, they butchered all the names. So instead of Buffalo Bull who sits down, they call him Sitting Bull. He isn't, the name doesn't mean, it does not mean sitting bull. It means a bull who starts to sit down is what that means. And so she told us his story about who he was. And I think the one story that she told us about our ancestor was when he was like a teenager. He was like 17. He went on his first vision, and it was a sun dance he was in. And they pierced him and they pulled him up, and he was hanging a couple of inches off the ground. And he went into a trance. And in the trance, he had a vision of him being a child again. As he was walking through this prairie, he heard this voice crying for him, crying in the weeds over there. So he walked over towards these weeds, and there was a little depression in the earth there, and there was a wolf laying there. And the wolf had 2 arrows in its side, and he was yelling for help. So he went over and he pulled the arrows out, and he dressed the wounds. And he stayed with the wolf until it got better. He started to walk away. And as the wolf was walking away, he turned around and looked back at my great-grandfather and said, for helping me, he said, the nations will know you by just your name. And, so he didn't really realize that, this was anything special. But he didn't realize that what the wolf said was in the future that people around the world will know him by just his name. So this is how, to me, what his life was we all have difficulties and we all make mistakes through our lives, but when you're telling the history of your ancestors, you never talk about the bad things they did, you talk about the positive things that they did. And this is his life was, in a sense, I think my mother said that he was like a gifted child. He already knew things way beyond his years. And for this, that he accomplished a lot of things in ceremonies. So this is one of the things, the values that I have to uphold as I live through my life is try to carry his image and what he lived for in the way I live. Of course, I have to go through my own trials, tribulations to relearn what I had to do on this earth. So my respect to my great-grandfather is not to make any mistakes when I tell the stories about his life and my culture.
What happened when because before the white people came and started accumulating land and moving around and killings and Native Americans versus after the I hate to even say enslavement, but put them on reservations. The culture itself, the traditions, the ceremonies, what changed? Because I know I remember watching a movie about after moving a lot of the Native Americans to reservations, they forced them to start taking on Christian names. And so I even thought, I was like, well, if they've changed their Christian names, I'm definitely they're going to change their way of religion, because I don't think it was even a religion before Christianity came here. It was more of a spirituality, I would think. And then, because I think we talked about earlier how the ceremonies became illegal, which I didn't even know that. Could you talk about that once? What really changed once the enslavement of Native Americans, or at least moving them to reservations?
Well, actually, I think, before the encroachment of the Europeans into our area here, we were all individuals, as I spoke to you earlier,
right.
That we all had our own gift, you might say, or a talent. And we're told through storytelling and by example how to recognize this gift. And through this gift that we had, we can also perform our own ceremonies. Mm-hmm. And this is what we did, but as a group. And my great-grandfather, you talked about him as a chief. In a ceremony, he relayed to me that he was a sun dancer. Mm. And that's what he told me. He said, I'm a sun dancer. And a chief is not like your president or like the governor or anything. A chief is a person, an individual growing up. And this is one of the things that my mother always emphasized when she told us the stories, is that within us, within our bodies, we have these emotional values that we have to keep in balance. It's compassion, generosity, humility, fortitude, humor. We also have fear, but we cannot allow that to be afraid of anything. I mean, it's a natural instinct to be afraid of something at the moment, but don't be afraid of it. So we have to keep these systems in balance with each other. And how we do that also as a male is we have to look to our mothers, our grandmothers, our older sisters, and our aunties, because they have the wisdom that we weren't born without. We were born without as males. So we have two parts in our life, the male and the female. We have our own way of talking. They have their own way of talking. The women do, the females. And she always told us, you never look your mother, your grandmothers, or your older sisters, your aunties in the eye when you're talking to them. You don't look at them in the face. So, I don't question. But my uncle was the one who told me. He showed me. He went to see his sister, and he never looked at her. And I said, why don't you look at her? And he said, well, he says, because he says, when you look at your auntie or your older sister or your mother, your grandmothers, he says, they look you in the eye, you look them in the eye, he says, you have a tendency to lie because you think they're reading something at you. So when you're not looking at them in the eyes, he says, you can be truthful and honest in your conversation with them. And this is the culture that as a Lakota young child growing up, you take that into your life. And then you start to exhibit all these emotions that you have, the compassion, the generosity. This is what the women have naturally. And they only do that once a month. They purify themselves once a month through her menstrual cycle. So they get their wisdom gets stronger each time as they get older. So we try to emulate or try to understand that wisdom, because as males, we don't have that gift. So for us to purify our soul like they do, we have to go to this, what we call the purification lodge, which they call the sweat lodge. And we do that as often as we can to purify our spirit that's in us, to try to understand that little bit of maybe 10% of the wisdom of a woman, of a female or your grandmother. And once you do that, the people will see you, and they would see how you're acting and your compassion, your generosity, your humility, and your fortitude, and how you care for people. And then they choose you to be the spokesperson for your tribe, for your band. So that's how they call him Itrachan. That's how they become what they call a chief. And he's not a leader, he's just a spokesperson, but he cares for the people. And all the people, they congregate and they want to be around him because of his humility and his fortitude, how he took care of them. If somebody's hungry, he's always there for them. There's no favoritisms. And it's a hard life because a man doesn't want to be a chief, because you're always giving your things to people that need it, or you're always feeding the hungry, you're always taking care of the sick. So you're looked at as a person with a lot of compassion and wisdom. You're a male, you can hunt, you can protect, but you also have that ability to have the wisdom of the female. So these are the things that my great grandfather carried with him. And even though the military was after him, Philip Sheridan put a proclamation out to kill him.
Right.
After the Little Bighorn battle. But he still called him his friend, even though he was, looked down on. And this is a compassion, you can't take life seriously. Like, I see it around me as I'm growing up on this side. In my culture, what I was taught is, why take life seriously? Tomorrow's another day, yesterday's over, and like I say, my great grandfather lived back in the 1800s. That's over 100 years ago he lived on this earth. And he died in 1890. So, from then to now, times have changed.
Oh, lots.
And when the Europeans came into our area, they couldn't understand our ceremonies, how we live. And the humility part is what keeps us from saying anything, because you're humble. You're humble before you don't want to argue about your ancestors. You don't want to talk about your past and argue this what he did or this what should have did. It's over with. What can we do now to go forward? And we have all these nations out here. We have the Lakota, which is I'm a part of Lakota, and then we have the Shahila, which is the Cheyennes, the Arampahos, the Crows, the Blackfeet. All of them are out here. But as time came forward, the Europeans came in there and they didn't understand our culture, our ceremonies. So anything that the Europeans don't come here, they brought their fear with them. So they didn't understand anything. They equated to either a devil, hell, or whatever. See, that's why we have this lodge in Wyoming. They call it Devil's Tower. It's not a devil. It's not a tower. It's a story behind all why that it looks like that. We call it the Bear Lodge. And then there's so many things that when the Americans don't understand it, they equate it to the devil or hell or Satan's cave or whatever.
Right.
And this is where the ceremonies, they didn't understand our ceremonies. Our ceremonies are not bad. They're sort of positive. So to carry this pipe and to pray with it, you're praying for the life of your future and all living things. That's what my great grandfather did when he sundanced. That's what I did when I sundanced. I gave my blood, sweat, and tears for the survival of the earth, Mother Earth, and all the living things that's on her. Anything that moves has a spirit. The green growing things, the four-legged, the winged, those that crawl, those all have a spirit, and you have to respect that spirit, and that's in them, because if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be able to balance the ecosystem that's here,
Right.
which we're now destroying as humans. So when they couldn't understand our ceremonies, they outlawed it. We could not do it no more. But our ancestors still carried it on. They took it underground. My mother did, and my granduncles did. And they still kept the songs, the sacred songs, the basic songs that came with the pipes and ceremonies. And I think they did this in the 1920s when we couldn't do it. Actually, that's a law that passed. You couldn't burn sage, you couldn't burn sweetgrass, you couldn't sing sacred songs. You could powwow, but they had government officials there to make sure that we're not doing anything sacred with it. I mean, to them, they didn't understand what sacred is, because our way is a spiritual way of life. We don't have a church. We can smudge the air and speak to the spirits wherever we wanted to. You see, this is things that they didn't understand. And, like the Purification Lodge, you didn't understand that. The Humblecha, the Vision Quest, they didn't understand that. Sundance, you have the piercings in the Sundance, which that pierce your chest, your back. And they didn't understand that. They couldn't understand anything with values this way. And they brought their Christianity in there, and they try to convert the natives into being Christians. And I remember living on the reservation. We were like 5, 6 years old, and every Saturday these government officials on horseback, they spoke. A lot of them were Lakota. They worked for the U.S. government. They come up into our house and they ask my mother and father if anybody was sick or something happened to anybody in the house, and usually there's nobody. And then they say, "You're going to church tomorrow." It's not like, "Are you going?" He says, "You're going to church tomorrow." So we would go to this church, which was maybe a mile away from our house. They had churches all over the reservation. And I would go in there, and the preacher come in there, and he was a Lakota guy who spoke Lakota. And preacher, he's talking about how we're going to burn, and if we didn't follow the teachings of this book. And that turned me off. I mean, at 5, 6 years old, somebody can tell me what to do. And he's telling me this, and my mother's telling me stories at night at home that go opposite of each other. The two worlds are like this. So I would go home, and my mother would, she didn't tell me what to do, what not to do, but she would, choice was mine. And she always said, look inside yourself, discover yourself. And she tells me, don't do what I tell you to do. Do what you got to do. Find out who you are in yourself. So I carried these values with me ever since I was a child growing up. And, I never did ceremonies or anything because it was outlawed at the time. So she would do them, but, I never was there to do them, or I never was there to see them. And my granduncles did them too, but I never seen them do it either. So they took it underground. We lived on a reservation. They would go into the Badlands and do that. The old men did. And my mother would do it in the house. She would have us outside looking out for the government people. When she was doctoring women and children, she was a medicine woman. So she would do these things. And, I grew up, she always, and then we moved to Rapid City, South Dakota. And she told me before we moved, she said that, all these stories she was telling me, I tell it to my friends, and she said, no. And I said, why? She said, there'll be a time in the future, she said, when you can do that. but you don't do it now because your life will never be the same. So that's my part what you're talking about, this asking about here.
I want to ask you this. This is, I mean, you brought some great points up and great questions to my head about. First, we'll go back to the women, because a lot of times when you see the movies that Hollywood made throughout time, and in fact, most of the Native Americans in the movies were white people, just in what we call, I guess, drag here in Hollywood, but in costume. But women in history, other than queens of England and stuff like that, were always pretty much like livestock. So, but what you're saying is the Native American, at least Lakotas, looked at women as relevant and equal. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't say equal. I'd say they were higher than us. They were the backbone of our society and our culture.
Wow.
The women had the final say in all decision making, in everything. So, like, say, you're talking about chief,
Right.
Like my grandfather, and they had these little council members. They were chosen the same way, but the last word on these guys being chosen came from the women. If the women said no, he wasn't chosen.
Huh.
They looked at him to see if he had the qualities of compassion, generosity, fortitude, and humility to be able to sit a council without arguing. You have to be able to accomplish decisions without arguing, without fighting, which men are good at doing. We're good at fighting in the moment.
Right.
The drop of a hat, we can punch each other in the nose. But women that can settle issues without arguing or fighting in them days is what my mother always emphasized to my sisters. She always said, you have to be this way, even though we're living in a society that's opposite from us.
Mm-hmm.
That's teaching us something different. So she always told us also, she said, you can have 20 elders and 2 children in the middle. The children are sacred. They're the future. And these 20 elders will tell them stories about the culture. And that's how I learned a lot of my stuff is from other elders. I would go see them and I'd listen to them. And they would talk about stories. They would tell you many things about what the world is, And
right.
Here you are going to public school over here, learning out of a book, textbook. And you come back out here and my mother said, we have a textbook too. I said, really? She said, yeah. It's not written in words. But she said, it's written in the land. The land is our textbook. So you stand on the hill, she says, look at the prairie, look at the trees, look at the mountains, listen to the river, listen to the wind. They all have a message to give you. Listen to the wing, listen to the four-leggeds. They say things, you look at them to get your example. And this is how you carry their values within yourself to understand that they're spirits just like you. And they're far more greater intelligence than you give them credit for, she said. So I look at animals and birds and everything as a spirit, and the trees, the green growing things out here. A lot of these green growing things out here are medicine, because for a long time there are a lot of the diseases that wiped out our people over here.
Mm-hmm.
They brought them from Europe.
Right.
But later on we found out that all these diseases that the Europeans brought from Europe, Mother Earth has an antidote for it. And it grows out here in the field. So, I was standing out here one time, my wife was with me, and she says, man, look at all the weeds out there. And I said, that's not weeds. I said, some of that's medicine. I said, there's medicine out there. I said, the medicine consists of a plant. It has a root, a stem, a leaf, and a flower. And it depends on which part of that plant you use to cure a disease. It could be the root, it could be the stem, it could be the leaf, or it could be the flower. And the rest is worthless. That just one item on that plant is what you use to cure certain diseases that's born of this earth. My
Like,
mother has an antidote for it.
I guess the rest wouldn't be worthless because if it wasn't for the rest of it, it wouldn't grow in the first place. So it all needed to be at
Right.
have.
It's not worthless. It's just that, I'm just
It
saying that
wasn't. Yeah, I know what you meant, but
it's
yeah, I
not a
mean,
positive.
it's kind of like I think human beings or humans on this planet are like that. Um, we look each other as so much different, but we're like that weed or that plant or that grass out there. That each part of us is part of that plant, and we forget that you're part of the right side of the plant. I'm the left side of the plant. Europeans are this side of the plant, and I think if without the foundation, we are worthless. But I think together we have to realize that we're part of this world, and we're either destroying it or making it better. And unfortunately, we don't look at each other as working together to make this a better place. I want to ask also, you were talking about your great-grandfather had visions. I work with a lot of intuitives, a lot of psychics. What is Native Americans, or at least Lakotas, what did they see as people with vision? I mean, like I say, we call them psychics here. And was it mostly women, or was it a combination of everyone? Because, I mean, your grandfather sounded like he had visions. Even when, I think, was it Little Bighorn, he had a vision before the battle.
Right. Well, all of us have visions.
Right.
All of us have, every one of us have a spiritual guide. Like I was telling you earlier,
Right.
that I have one. It attached himself to me. It attached itself to me the minute I took my first breath, and it's still with me. It's probably with me right now, standing and listening to what I'm saying here, because I ask it to help me, to try to choose the right words, so that what I say can convey a message to whoever is listening to me in this language, because this language is very difficult, as I told you earlier.
Right.
It's very difficult to get the message, the point. Whereas in Lakota, if a lot of Lakota speakers are here, what I spoke in Lakota, they will all understand what I just said. There will be no ifs, ands, ors about it. And this is the difficult part about telling these stories in this language, or talking about my culture or my ways in this language, because there's a lot of misconceptions. People would. I'll give you an example. My mother told me, she says, if you're talking to four people in this English language, she said, and then she said, Washichu Wogalaka, she said, if you're talking to them in the American language, she said, to four people, you tell them a story, she said, one on this side, she says, might get angry. This one here might start laughing. And this one over here might start crying. And then this fourth one might understand what point you're trying to make, because she said that the wording is so difficult to get to the right exact point of what you're trying to say. And at the beginning of all my talks I used to give, around the country and around the world there, my wife is always with me, and she's sitting behind me sometimes, or in front of me out there in the audience, and I'm trying to get a point. Somebody asked me a question, and I'm trying to tell the story or answer the question, and I just can't find the right wording to get to the point. So I'm talking, I'm droning on, and she's going like this, and then I catch myself and I say, oh yeah, I am just, So this is the difficult part about trying to answer a question of somebody asked me about my culture or my grandfather's life or my life, and it's very difficult because the wording in this language. So I'm learning, from my wife how to do this without any mistakes, really.
Well, and like I said, I work with a lot of people in Hollywood with psychics and intuitives and women too. And like I said, I've learned so much about my own journey when it comes to being an intuitive or having visions. I mean, because I think just the gut feeling, the your inner voice that speaks to you, and when you go against it, it kicks you in the butt. So And that's what I always found fascinating about the Native American culture is just the spirituality of it. Like I said, I grew up in the Midwest, very Christian. Like you said, the doom and gloom, the fear of God. And it was funny, a friend of mine, he's from Brazil, and he even said, he goes, you Americans or you white people, he goes, you guys are always worried about everything. He goes, you just don't just live. You just don't, or you're not, happy because you just always are worried about so much. And after, because we hear all the time, and I want truth be told to be real, but we hear all the time, Native Americans, they got into alcohol, they're, they don't want to work, and and I'm like, that is, pardon my French, bullshit, because every Native American I've ever met are the most centered people that I've ever met, because they do, a lot of them do keep their traditions. And I want to hear from you, when you hear those stereotypes about Native Americans, what can you relay to our audience that, the truth about that?
Well, I understand that, what they're saying about alcohol and not having work or anything, but I can tell you for a fact that, I was a land surveyor. I went to land surveying school and I became a land surveyor.
Right.
I worked in Wyoming for a long time. Then we went to Pine Ridge one time to do a surveying job on a reservation. The guy I worked for in Gillette, Wyoming, was a Native American. He was a Chippewa, and he had his own surveying company called Eagle Surveying and Mapping. And him and I were good friends. I knew him since '70, right after I came back from Vietnam. And I met him, and we became friends, and we worked together for a company, and he went into business for himself. And we're down there, and we needed some rodmen, to hold the rod and chain with us. So we got on Pine Ridge, and we put a little bulletin on the board there, and need some rodmen. In the morning at 8 o'clock, we came back to the office there, and man, there must have been 30 guys lined up out there. And I'd say 25 of them were better educated than we were. They had degrees, they had doctorate degrees, they had from different universities, Dartmouth, Harvard, Yale. And I was shocked. I said, what are you guys doing here, man? I said, you stand holding a rod for us, And they said, well, you can't get work anywhere around here. I said, nobody will hire us because we're natives. And he says, the only place we can get hired is if we leave, the whole state. Maybe we go to California or New York or Texas or somewhere far away from here. He said, our responsibilities are we're taking care of our grandmothers or whoever are here, our mothers. And he said, we just can't leave them. So he says, we have to stay here, and nobody will hire us here in South Dakota because of the color of our skin, And to me, that is the most ignorant thing for anybody to do. In Wyoming, we're Native Americans, but we did our job, and every Native American you ever meet, if you give him a chance, you'll have some of the best things. Just like the what they call the Hispanics or Mexicans. A lot of them were Native Americans. I'd say majority of them are Native Americans, from Mexico, and they will work. They will work, and there's no ifs, ands, ors about it. They'll do everything that is required of them to do. And I always tell people, the non-Native people, if you want a really good friend, choose a Native American, a Lakota. If you treat him right, he's going to treat you like a king. Wow. He's going to treat you like a brother. He is. He will look at you that way. If you treat him right, don't lie to him, because, you shouldn't do this. And this is the frustrations of why alcoholism is on these reservations. Because not only South Dakota, but all the other reservations around the country, majority of the non-Native people that have businesses, they won't employ natives because of this. And this causes a complex amongst the natives also to, it's a reverse racism thing, Right. I tell them, I try to explain to them, don't be that way, because I was told as a child growing up, I should not ever do reverse racism toward anybody, even if they don't like me for the color of my skin or whatever. Even I faced racism all my life, ever since I was a child, up until even now. Even we just had an incident here a couple of weeks ago. My wife and I, we left her because of a motorcycle rally, and we're in Wyoming, and we went to a restaurant. We wouldn't get served because I was native, I guess, and we're an interracial couple, and wife's from Germany.
They wouldn't serve you in 2019?
Yeah, in Thermopolis, Wyoming. And me and my wife used to get all flustered about it. I told her, just let her go. I said, we got other places we can go, It doesn't have to. I says, and that's over with. I said, it's done. It's still very much here. Whether, the people say they got over it. No, it's to me, racism comes from fear. Yeah. Again, the umbrella of fear. Right. People fear you because of the color of your skin. That's kind of, I don't say, an undoing thing, I think. Because in Vietnam, I seen that racism, very much. And I seen them after a firefight. A black man, a white man, an Oriental, a Vietnamese, and they bleed just as red, and their insides just look just alike. Right. There's no difference on the inside. And that spirit there's no color. When the spirit leaves your body, it doesn't have color. So this is, as Lakota people, we know. At one time, we all knew each other in the spirit world. I knew all of these people in this world, probably knew them one time or another in the spirit world. And now they're here, but they come in a different body. And all of us at the beginning, there was no racism, there was no hate, there was nothing. I seen that, I see it lately. You see these little kids about 5, 6 years old, they're playing with each other, all different races. And then you see them 10 years later, and they're all in groups again, because it's a learned experience of fear, racism. So this is one of the things that, to overcome any of these things, greed, racism, you have to get out from the umbrella of fear. And you have to work on the young ones to do that, because the old ones are already set in their ways. And I've talked to a lot of guys, older guys, about this. And it's hard. They can't change. You just can't change they can't just change their ways. Turn 180 degrees and say, I have no fear. Because, like you said, most of them were raised in Christianity, religion, organized religion. And then, their parents tell them, if you don't get out there and get this education, you'll be pumping gas in some gas station or stocking shelves in some grocery store. Why? Why do you want to do all that? I don't have an education. I dropped out of high school before I went in the Army, got a GED in the basic training. I went to tried a couple of years of college. I couldn't grasp it because I was too old. You didn't care about the history of what was being told to me. So I took the practical way. I went to auto mechanic school. I turned on an engine, rebuild engines. And then I went to the surveying school. I even drove 18-wheelers from all over the United States, And I've done everything at one time or another. I lived all over the United States. I started in California, Texas. Well, in Texas, actually, because my first ex-wife was from Texas. And then my second ex-wife was from North Carolina, so I lived down there. And then people ask me, how come you don't, snag around here? I said, because it could be my cousin,
Sounds like where I'm from.
Yeah. I said, I don't want to be, snagging my own cousin,
Right. I have a question. I want to talk a little bit more about the traditions and the ceremonies. And one that I was looking up, and I really didn't know what it was, and I thought maybe if you could explain it. What is the 7 sacred rites?
The 7, okay, those are the ceremonies that came with the sacred pipe. And see, the sacred pipe was brought to us by a woman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they call her the white buffalo cap woman. And we still have that sacred bundle of green grass up here in the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation. The sacred pipe that she brought us, gave to the people. And every pipe that's here, like my pipes and all the pipe carriers that I know, the pipe basically comes off of that one. That's the main one that was brought to us. And she brought us these ceremonies. Well, the first two ceremonies she taught to the people, which is keeping of the soul and releasing of the soul ceremonies, which is when your loved one passes away, you keep their soul with you for a year, and then after the year, you have this big giveaway, a feast, and you release its soul to, to travel back to the spirit world. And then you have the purification lodge, which they call the sweat lodge, and then you have the Hombelechow, which is the vision. And then you have the Sundance, the Wewangwachi.
What is the Sundance? What are they doing in the Sundance?
A Sundance is a ceremony that you give your as a person. You're out there in the middle of the Sundance arena with your connection to the spirit, to the great mystery.
Oh, okay.
And you're showing him that you're doing this for 4 days with no food and water, dancing in a hot sun. You're giving up yourself, your blood, sweat, and tears for the survival of your culture, of your people, for the sick that they get better, for the young children that they will understand the Lakota ways. This is what the Sundance is about. Basically, the survival of the earth. You give your blood, sweat, and tears, and you suffer for your mother and your children. You're not doing this for yourself. You're doing it for them. That's what the Sundance is about. And then we have the other ceremonies we have are like the Ishnati, they call it. That's a woman's ceremony. That's the only ceremony that belongs to the women. I can't speak of that because I have no idea what it's about.
Yeah, you haven't done it.
Women are the only ones that do this. And then the Hunkayapi, we call it. That's making of a relative. When you're born, you have, people might have 4 or 5 kids, but they're the product of your mother and father. And you may not get along well, which all of us have, a brother or sister you don't get along with because, they're egotistical. But you come from the same mother and father, but you may not get along with her, or him. So the Hunkayapi is you make a relative. You see a person that's not related to you, and he likes you, you like him, and you get along with each other. You tell him your secrets, he tells you his secrets. You fight for him. You take care of him when he's sick, and he takes care of you. It's a mutual thing between two guys, and that creates a bond between two men, two boys. And this is when you go to a ceremony, and you do a ceremony and the spirit comes in there and tells you that you have chosen each other to be brothers. It overrides your own blood brothers. In other words, your own relative brother. This Hunkai, because in this conscious mind, this day and time, you chose this person to be your brother. He chose you to be his brother. And you take care of his family if he dies or something happens to him, because he chose him to be your brother. So this is a ceremony we call Hunkai. And then we have another, 7th one is the Tapa Wonkaya, we call it. It's a throwing the ball ceremony. It's where they make a big ball of sage, and they have 4 children stand in 4 directions: the west, the north, the east, and the south. And then the one in the middle, and he throws his ball. This ball, and they're singing with it. Everything has a song. Every ceremony is a song. So you sing the song for them, and they throw this. This represents and signifies that the spirit's with us, all around us. So when you throw this ball, you see the spirits. They're here with us. They're all around us. We're not alone. Like some people say, well, I'm all alone in the forest or in the desert. No, you're not. You have the spirits around you. They're with you everywhere you go. Your own spiritual guides are with you. So this is a ceremony that the Lakota put away when the Americans took the idea and made baseball out of it. They made one played first, second, third base, and a pitcher in the middle. And they used a bat to hit the ball. And it's not the same thing. And I always say, we need to bring these ceremonies to put away back. That is one of them. The throwing the ball ceremony. Because that explains to the younger people that you're not alone. You have the spirits around you. Spirits, your ancestors are there to guide you, to give you direction. Because every morning you get up, you have that split, you have to look at it every day. Every time you wake up, you have that trail of splits like this. Do I this way or do I go this way? And so, with me, I always took the easy way. It's never the positive way. It always ends up in the dead end, and I have to backtrack to figure out. And then one day I decided I'd take the hard way. It's hard, but I'm going to try it. But then I was successful. I reached this plateau. I put myself in the back, said, man, I did something right positive here first time. But now I have to rely on the wisdom of my wife. I ask her, I always take her because she's the backbone of our home here. It's our home together, but it's really her house. It's what I say. It's a Lakota culture. When a man has a teepee and he takes a female to be his companion, it's part of his soul. The minute she enters the teepee, it's hers.
Wow.
It's not his. It's her house. It's her teepee. That's like here. It's her house. She decorates it. She takes care of it. She does whatever she wants with it. I provide for it. I do the maintenance on it and I paint it, whatever she wants. But because it's her house.
Right.
It's not really, mine. So these are the values of a Lakota. How we do. We look at the woman. And those are the seven sacred ceremonies that came with the pipe. And then there's some that were added later too, like the pipe ceremonies.
Right.
And stuff like this. But those are the first 7 sacred ones.
And I've always wanted to actually, and now are ceremonies like this open to like people to enjoy it, or is it only for people in the tribe or in the community of Native Americans, or can people actually go and be a part of it?
Well, actually, like the Hopi tribe, they're a closed society. They don't allow other people to come into their ceremonies. But the Lakota, when we reinstated our ceremonies, that was 1980, 79, 80s when Jimmy Carter signed it into law so we could practice our burning sage and ceremonies again. They kind of went off the deep end than the modern natives. They have these co-ed sweats, which is, I ask these females, and I have a lot of them get mad at me, they get angry because I questioned them. I said, why do you want to come to a purification lodge? I said, you don't need to. I said, you purify every month, or you stand on a hill with like a man, I said, why do you want to do that? You don't need to. You purify every month. And during that purification you're going through, you have your visions. And then in the Sundance, that's a man's ceremony. All these were given, the ceremony was given to the men except for that one ceremony. The She Lives Alone ceremony called the Ishnanti. She lives alone. Those are the ceremonies that they do for themselves. So, and then they have these group ceremonies, which again, like I was telling you earlier,
right.
We all have a pipe. We all do our own ceremonies. We have our own hochuk, as we call it, our own altars. And what the songs we use in there are ours, are my spirits. In other words, my ceremonial room in there is not it's a room. It's not the stuff in there is not just mine. It belongs to my spiritual guide who directed me to put it the way it is. So when I go in there, and it's dark in there all the time, I go in there, I have eagle feathers, buffalo skulls, pipes, everything in there. I go in there and I speak to them. They talk to me in Lakota, they don't talk to me like we're talking to each other. The messages they give me is just like a fragment of a sentence. Like say you're in a car and you're driving down a highway and your car radio's on. Mm-hmm. You turn your car radio on, you catch a middle of a sentence, somebody talking, and then all of a sudden you go out of range of the radio station and it fades away. And you might catch something that he's talking about. Well, the same way with the message, you're talking about visions. This is like the messages that was told to me. So my chore is, I guess as I say, is to connect the dots. Is what did he mean when he gave me this little message here, a little fragment? And then I guess in a way I'm getting pretty humbled with it. I'm getting pretty accurate, not accurate, but, I guess you might say understanding of what the message is.
Right.
So some of the messages are just for myself and my wife and my home, but some of it is I share with the world, is what they told me. So that's what I do now. And I do my own visions. I do my own purification. And, I don't need anybody else. And this is one of the things that as Lakota, we do as our own, trying to get back to who we are.
Right.
But once we discover our gifts and our talents, we work together side by side, to enact the future.
Well, speaking of the future, what is your guides or spirits or ancestors telling you about the future of humanity in this planet? We can all see what's happening and right before our eyes. I just looked in the news today that in Brazil, in the Amazon, there's been over 72,000 fires and in the Amazon, and it's just keeps getting worse and worse. This is the biggest supplier of our oxygen. We see in thousands of plants and animals disappearing every year. With the race. So what is your guides that you see or heard from other Lakota saying about our future?
Well, like I said, there's a lot of guys I spoke with, that had visions, ceremonies, and we talk to each other at times, and they all have similar visions as I do. They're not exact, but they parallel each other. And it was 25 years ago was the first time I had a spirit come and tell me. He said that the axis of the world is going to change, and he said the climate, as just seasons that you call it, as spring, summer, fall, winter, are going to be different. They're going to start to change. When it should be cold, it'd be hot. When it should be hot, it'd be cold. All these kind of things. And then we went to a ceremony one time with this little girl come in there. It was a pipe ceremony, and she said her mother and grandmother took her to a church. She called it a revival or something like this, and she said that the people there were just yelling and screaming and hollering. She said to fear God. And she came to the ceremony and she asked, in the ceremony, she asked if, she says, how come I got to fear you? And the spirit said, you don't fear me. He said, humble yourself before me. He said, there's a real thin line between fear and humble.
Right.
And he said, do not fear me. He said, humble before me. He said, because I care for you. He says, there's no Lakota. In Lakota, we have no word for love. But he says, I care for you. And this is my explanation in translation is, he loves and cares for all human beings, all his creations, all children. And he said, do not fear me. He said, because if you don't fear me, he says, I will help you, elevate you. You will stand on my shoulders. He says, and I will hold you up. But he says, if you fear me, he says, I will show you what fear is. He says, look to the future. In the future, he said, you're going to see it. He said, the elements are going to show you what fear is. And look what's happening. What they call the Bible Belt, from Texas all the way to the New England coast. Tornadoes, floods, all this, fires all over. These are people who fear God, are the ones that are experiencing this fear right now. And this ecosystem is being destroyed by us as human beings, what we do. Because it doesn't matter what we do, how we do, but, we're a part. Every one of us are a part of we're guilty of being part of this, destroying our ecosystem. Because every time you start your engine on your car, you're polluting the air, and every time you turn on the lights in your house, you're polluting the air. You're destroying things. And for us to, it's coming. From the future, this I call it the fourth purification. The spirits told me the earth's purified 3 times already. And this is the 4th one that's coming. And it's going to be upon us. But we can't stop it because what we went over probably 60% of it already of destroying it. So Mother Earth is going to repurify herself. But for us as spirits, we have to get through it. And like the Spirit told me, he said, "Kapta kapta ilal." He said, "You're going to go through it." He said, "But you have to come out from under that umbrella of fear. Mm-hmm. Do not fear." He said, "Do not fear the future. Tomorrow is a beautiful day." He says, "Next week is a beautiful day. Next year, next moon, every moon, every month is a moon." Right. We had 13 months in Lakota culture, 13 moons. And he says, every moon, he says, it's beautiful in the future. And he says, and you're talking about aliens and stuff. And they told us
that was the next question. Star people.
Yeah, the what they call it, well, some call it the star people. In Lakota, we call it the Mokasitomnie, which is what they call the galaxy here, the Milky Way. Mm-hmm. And there's many of them out there. And there's life in this galaxy that is sacred to us, they're related to us, because they all come from the great mystery. Mm. And so at the end of our prayers, we always have a word. We say, "Mitakuye oyasen." That means to all my relatives. Okay. People say, "Well, you're talking about other people." No, we're talking about the animals, the green growing things, those that fly, those that crawl. They're related to us. Even those in the Mokasitomnie. There's entities that live out there who are related to us because they are still created by the great mystery. And, I always say, this lately, I've had, I was telling you when you interviewed me the first time,
right.
I said, I probably anger some people, which is true, which is the spirits. What they tell me is they don't tell me things that I should know. I guess I have to figure things out on my own. And one of the things is, we call this creator Wakantanka, a great mystery, great sacred mystery. And, I asked people, I said, what is this sacred mystery? And, I think that the medicine people took this idea from Christianity, calling it the great mystery of He. And my question to them was, I said, "Do you think really?" I said, "I'm a man." I said, "I've been through life." I said, "I've been through wars. I've been through everything. And I've always made horrendous wrong decisions, even though I took the right path.
Right.
I'm always making decisions." I said, "Do you think a man has enough wisdom and enough ability to create this world like how it is, how it balances itself, Right. And, I had an organized religious group guy, he got kind of angry with me because he says God is a man. And I said, if he is, do you think he had the wisdom? Yeah, he does. He said, and I said, that's one. If he is, I said, he's just one in a billion, a zillion.
Awesome. And
I'm not going to question my spirits about the identity of the great mystery. But one day we all will know who the great mystery is. Those of us that will get through this great purification that's coming.
Well, and what do you think about the spirit world? All of us, my mother just passed away. All of us have lost people. And, every day we hear of people die. I mean, millions of people that die a day. And, I not too long ago, about a year and a half ago, I did a past life regression. What do you think, and what does Lakota think of reincarnation and the afterlife?
Okay, well, I was told through the ceremony too, that this, about like you say, back in the 90s, and through the ceremony, I had a vision, and I was at Bear Butte, and I had this vision of people crying, and man, it was so sad. It was like, I don't know. I mean, they had me crying, the voices, and there was nobody. I was the only one on this hill, but I heard these voices. all around me. And they went on all night. And then pretty soon it was just like there was millions of them just crying. And man, I prayed hard. I said, why am I hearing this, And so the next day, it was only one night, because I was helper to the medicine man, putting people up and bringing them down, vision quest. So since I've sweated every day for a month, I felt like a prune.
Right.
So then I came back down and we went into the ceremony, and I told the spirit what I heard, what I seen. And the spirit told me, he said, this was coming from the future. He says, in Lakota, he said, he said, he says, coming real close. And he said, these are people who won't listen to the messages that, like me, myself, and others that we share. Right. He says, there's a lot of individuals that were given the ability to share their future visions with the people. But he says, a lot of them don't want to know. He says, and it could come within your own friends. He says, your own family members are going to be this way. They're not going to understand it. But he said, the moment that purification starts, they're the ones that's going to run to you. Run to those of you who have this knowledge and try to ask for help. But he says, there's nothing you can do for them. He says, number one he says, they have to do it themselves. They have to balance with themselves compassion, generosity, humility, fortitude, and get out from under fear. Don't let fear rule you. He says, because the minute this happens, the really eye-opening part of that answer to that was, he says, they're going to do this for eternity. He says they're not going to move on to the spirit world. He says, every human being on this planet has the ability, as right now, to go forward, to get out from under this, to teach themselves, to care for each other, to care for one another. He says, you've been there, you've seen war. He said, you've seen death, destruction, all these things. He says, you can talk about it because you've been there. And he says, these people that do this, he says, they live in a little bubble, a little mundane existence. And they don't realize it. You're standing outside the borders of this. And he says, you see it and you know it. Wow. And he says, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it humbles me. It makes me sad on the inside. Right. But I have hope. Hope is what my grandfather had. He hoped that, that the people will survive, in 1890 before he was murdered. And he allowed him to do this ghost dancing, even though that wasn't a Lakota ceremony, a sacred ceremony. So to survival of his culture and his people, even though they were trying to destroy it. And this is my way of saying the same thing. And Black Elk and Footscrow had the same similar visions. Black Elk had a vision of a tree of life with just a small circle of people that's going to be around that tree of life, that's going to survive. And Footscrow had the same vision, but he said it was a small group like that. And my my vision is the similar way, but I look at it as, there's about 330 million people in this country, and then around the world there's probably billions. And if you take 10% of that, that's a little bit of an accomplishment, Right. 10% of all these billions, but it's up to them. There's nothing that I can say or do. I can't take them to a ceremony. I can't get them to a sweat lodge. They have to do it themselves first before they choose, again, that fork in the road. Which way are they going to go? It's up to them. Christianity or just living a sacred. You don't have to be a Lakota. You don't have to be a Lakota ceremony one. I always tell these people, I says, people say, I don't have a pipe. Well, I'll just go to a tree. Back up to a tree, put your back to a tree and talk to the spirit. The tree will send your voice to the creator. Wakantunka will hear it. But I says, you don't ask for wealth, you don't ask for material things. You ask for the health of the earth, you ask for the healing, the curing of the human beings, that they can get along with each other. that they can live with humor, with compassion, humor, generosity, help each other without being asked. This is the Lakota culture. You do things without being asked. You look at an old lady trying to move something, you go there and help her, an old man. Right. Or you see somebody trying to do something, you can just jump out of your car and you go help them without even being asked. This is compassion, generosity. This is your humbleness. You don't brag about what you did or who you are. Right. You're always humble before the Creator. But you got to have that fortitude. You be able to speak the truth. Have the courage to say things that goes against the grain, like I'm doing right now. Because, it's going to anger a lot of these people around the world, around the country, politicians, organized religious leaders, historians, because our story holds the truth, our own stories. My story does. This is a truth that I know, that I was told, and I've lived through a lot of it. So I know what I'm talking about. I'm not adding on or taking away. This is what the spirits tell me. Do not add on or take away on what you're saying something. And this is my goal is, to tell these stories in this language is very difficult. So as I've told you earlier, I am working on a manuscript right now for my first book, which is going to be called The Sundancer. It's my life, what I was telling you here. And then the second one is going to be The Force Purification is the title. That's the title that we're going to give it. It's going to be about my visions. It's going to awaken, I hope, all these other visionaries and near-death experience people and psychics who say they're psychics, who understand what the future is, can come back together and say, let's work together, stand together. No one's hiring anybody. I always tell the story about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall. So you go to that memorial wall and you look at the names on that wall. There's none bigger and there's none lower. The names are all the same. There could be officers, privates, sergeants, but they're all the same. That's how we were in Vietnam. We were brothers, equal. There's nobody better and nobody less. We were all the same. And this is how I try to portray my story to the people. There's nobody greater or there's nobody less. We're all equal. And power is the thunderstorm out there. Power is the fires you're talking about. Right. Power is the tornadoes, the hurricanes. That's power. It destroys. It can take your life. Yeah. But you have to humble yourself before the Creator to survive it. And these are my messages to anybody who wants to change their ways. They have to do it themselves. Nobody can teach it to you. You have to be the teacher of your own inner self.
Well, Ernie, we're going to have to make this a part two because we went over our time. But listen, you're one of the most fascinating guests I've ever had, and I've interviewed thousands of people just because you're so real, you're so humble, and because you've lived everything. You went through, your parents dying at a very young age. You've been through the Vietnam War. You said you got into alcoholism, homelessness, and so it's not like your life was not easy, but yet, you've learned from every angle and every turn that you've taken to want to teach, and I'm not going to say preach, but teach your life experiences, and then your family and your great grandfather's legacy. Not too many people have that chance. And what would you say if your grandfather envisioned 2019 and could give advice to people in 2019? What do you think he would say?
It would be very difficult for me to answer that question because he didn't live in a time like this.
Right.
For sure. Where you have cars and electricity, houses. They lived in the prairies, wide open. Mm-hmm. And, you could go anywhere you wanted to without a fence or, without a highway or nothing. It was just wide open. But I think, like I was telling this one lady, she asked me, she says, you ever see your grandfather in a ceremony? I said, yeah. I said, all the time. Most of the time he would come and stand there and look at me. And she said, he never says anything to you. I said, no. She said, I wonder why. And I said, well, the medicine man told me. He said, you don't ever want to hear your grandfather say anything to you. because if he does, he says, you're doing something wrong. So I said, yeah. I said, but see, I always ask my spirits, my spiritual guides to help me to, convey the message as best as I could in this American language to the audience that's listening to me, that I will, hopefully I'm not anything better or less. I'm an equal human being. The only thing is I have a message to share, and my life stories is not teaching, it's a sharing. I just share because I don't want anybody to be like me. Right. We all have our own individuality, ways to be who we are. And this is what I was taught as my mother and my father told me these things. Don't follow in my footsteps, what I do. Follow in your own. Create whatever you have to do. And that's where, I see this around the country. I mean, when I was growing up, young kids growing up, and they don't like the politics of a person, but their mother and father believe this way, so they automatically are that way. And I said, or they don't want to go to church because they don't believe in Christianity, but they're made to go to church because they have to. And I was never taught. I was never that way. I always looked at it. My mother and father as they didn't tell me I have to go to church. They said you have to go to church or you have to get an education. They said find out who you are. You'll be successful in what you do. So that's I ended up suffering from this war, but I still do. But on the other hand, the VA recognized a lot of the atrocities that we went through as veterans, as war guys, not only Vietnam, but others afterwards, Afghanistan, Iraq. And I tell these guys, I says, don't turn to alcohol or drugs. It's a spiritual wounding, what we have. What they call PTSD is not a mental thing, it's a spiritual wounding, or spiritual wounding, because we didn't prepare ourselves to go to battle, to go to war. So, that's another story. I could go into that, but I don't want to take your time up on that one.
Well, no, that's why I said we need to do a part 2 because you're just so fascinating and you have so many things. And I wanted to touch on so many things, but I'd like to touch on even more about the Star People and the spirituality and the and even more of the legacy. So if you do us the honor to come back again sometime and do a part 2, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, appreciate it.
Well, so the Sitting Bull Family Foundation, is that still active? And how do people find out more about it? And I'm sure people will probably want to learn more about yourself and your great grandfather's. You can find so much stuff about him, but they might want to find out more about you. How can they do that?
Well, I dissolved Sitting Bull Family Foundation because I was telling you earlier, all the members, the board members I had are all gone. Right. They passed away. So, and then again, it was basically for like a teaching of the culture. Right. But the spirit told me later on that after I dissolved it, I felt bad because I had to dissolve it because the board members are gone. And the spirit told me, he says, no, he says, don't, he said, everything's a learning experience. He said, this was a learning trip for you. He said, what you have to do is what I just did, is to tell the people that they have to heal themselves within, balance the emotions within themselves before they can come and understand, because then they will understand my culture. If you balance yourself, you have to come in with an open mind, open heart, open spirit, and have that balance within yourself to be able to get out from this circle of this mundane existence of this capitalistic world of making money. And the Lakota way of life is not making money. It's a survival of Mother Earth, survival of our people and our living things, because they balance our ecosystem. So, it's a journey for me to do this. But I've had better reception from the German people, from the Swedish people, from the French people. I mean, because I was in all these places in Finland, and I went to visit the Sami people in the Arctic Circle. Oh, and wow. Their culture is very similar to the Lakota way of life. And I was shocked, man, how we just connected like brothers. And I have a Sami girl. She calls me her uncle. I mean, I'm her uncle. She said, which is, I feel good, you know, that she takes me as an uncle. And we still communicate on Facebook, you know. And she's married now, got a couple of little kids, and she was a special girl, you know, when we met her. And see, these are the connections that I have. And then I've connected also with the Maori people from New Zealand and from the Aborigines of Australia. And, you know, I haven't been there, but, you know, they came here.
Right.
And we sat down and we had a lot of talks about how to do this, how to teach how to rekindle our ways and get out from under the umbrella of fear and to try to, because a native culture, native people, the native of the native lands, you don't have hate. You don't have, you know, like people come and say, oh, I hate this person. Well, you know, you don't have that. You have the pain of them people not understanding who you are as a person, as a nation of people. And we don't hold anything against these people who came here to do this because the spirits we know. I mean, but on the other hand, too, a lot of these pure people who fear God, when they pass away, they don't go to the spirit world because they're afraid to go to the spirit world.
Right.
So the country's full of ghosts. You know, this is what I told that Zach, the Ghost Adventures guy.
Right.
he came here to Deadwood and he interviewed me why we hold the Black Hills sacred. And I told him that. I says, Deadwood is a city of ghosts. I said, you go downtown Deadwood, I said, at night between 2 and 6 in the morning, and it's the whole streets are like alive, but they're not real live people. They're ghosts, you know. I said, go down and see it. I said, you're a ghost hunter. I said,
that's hilarious.
But I said, it's not Deadwood only. I said, it's all over the country. I says, you know, you experience these ghosts. And I says, because there are people who are afraid to go to the spirit world, or they're addicted to their money or their land or their house or something, and they can't go because they don't want to leave it and they don't want to die. But I says that's one of the things in our culture. They say don't fear death. You know, I grew up with this young man. His name was, I mean, he's not young. He's my age. I think he's older than I am, a couple of months. His name was Buddy Red Bull. He was a Lakota singer. And he made a couple of songs. You know, one of them was called "The Journey to the Spirit World," and he talks about that. You know, we went to school together, and you know, we went separate ways. And I think he died in '93. But he was telling me, you know, in his music, he told me, you know, he talks about the journey to the spirit world, and you know, you shouldn't fear death. Don't fear the spirit. You know.
I mean, like I said, stories, you have the best stories. So, Ernie, thank you so much for being on Truth Be Told and being part of now the Truth Be Told family. I know our listeners and viewers are going to love this, and we hope that get you back on soon. Hopefully Captain Ron will be with us. And if there's anything I can ever do, please just let me know. But everybody, thank you for tuning in to Truth Be Told. This is Ernie Pointe. And he is the great-grandson of Sitting Bull, and we hope that you guys enjoy this. Please leave comments, share this with all your friends. But for Truth Be Told, I'm Tony Sweet. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.